Hello, my name is James Cash. Today I wanted to record a small little video talking about customizing the mode line in Emacs. One of the kind of easiest things to customize, or one of the things that you see the most, see all the time when you're using your editor. So this can be a fun thing to customize to really make the editor look like your own. When I was using Vim, customizing the equivalent of the mode line I found very confusing. He used like this weird format string thing with all these special characters. Never really bothered to take the time to figure out how it worked. So I always ended up just using a package like Powerline or later Airline to customize it, make it look all fancy and stuff. Then when I switched to Emacs, when I first switched, I just kind of kept that that approach. So I just found a package. I think I used Spaceline, which is just the mode line part from Spacemacs. But after a while, I decided, I really want this to look like my own thing. This has other stuff that I don't want. I want something a little bit different. I want to be able to control more what I have. And also the font I use has a bunch of special characters. I'd like to take advantage of those. So I looked into it. I found it's actually really easy and very powerful to customize your mode line in Emacs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you do that. I've also written a blog post a while ago about that, so I'll link that in the description as well. So the basics, so let's just kind of start with what it is. We have mode line format is the variable that we're going to change. The documentation for it is quite substantial and tells you kind of all you need to know. Let's just play around, see some stuff for example. So you can set it to be nil, and then you can see that just completely gets rid of the mode line. That might be something you want to do if you want a super minimal setup or something. I'm gonna put here the default value. So this big thing here, this is what you get with Emacs-Q. So there's nothing else. So you can have a look at this, see what this looks like. This maybe looks somewhat familiar. I think some extra stuff showing up because of some packages I've loaded, like my little Nan cat, but we'll talk about that later. So you can see here what we have. We can kind of maybe format this a little bit. We have this %E. So this is one of the special percent format strings that the mode line understands. Oops. And then some of this being formatted a little strangely. Then we have a bunch of variables that just get filled in. Then we have this list, which is VC mode. We'll talk about what that does. Some spaces going here. And then this is just a space. And then finally we have these a bunch of other variables. So this is what it looks like by default. There's a bunch of other stuff. So how is this actually working? So the way, if we pull up this documentation again, the way this works is nil don't display mode line. There's a bunch of % constructs which are listed in the help page down here. So here we have that %E, which we can look at this, and somewhere here it will say what that is, which is not, I guess I could just search. %E is print an error message about full memory, so if something goes wrong, it would show up there. What it does otherwise, if it's a symbol, it will process that symbol as a mode line construct. So pretty much all these are variables that will contain things. So whatever. This is the default thing. I don't really particularly like it. I find it's a little arcane. So let's kind of build up. I'll start building up something that will look a little more like the mode line I use, and then we'll talk about some of the kind of neat things you can do with it. So first, let's just set mode line format. Start with something simple. So I'm going to give it a list of things. A list. So one of the nice simple things, we can start with the buffer name. So we can do %B. And so now it just says the name of the buffer. So now down here just says scratch. So okay, that's straightforward enough. Some other neat things we can do though. I'll just say kind of the basics. Where it gets more interesting is using some of these special constructs that it mentions here, where you can give it a list that looks starts with a symbol like eval or propertize. So propertize. If we give it a list that looks like this, this will apply the propertize function, which is useful. Well, you use it in Emacs to apply like special properties to a string. So this is how you can do things like on hover, make it look like something different. So if we do this %b, and then we could say apply the help echo property. We say when we do that, we want to do buffer file name. So if I set this isn't going to do anything in the current file because this isn't associated with the file. But what this would do would be if we hover over it, it would say what it is. Here, if we just say like hello, set it like that, then oops. If we hit help, the help key on that, it would say print out the buffer on hover. Let's see if I will work here. But for whatever reason, it is not doing the right thing here. I think because this buffer isn't associated with the file, it's doing something a bit funny. We'll get back to that though. So, did I misspell propertize? Whatever. I go hello. Whatever. When we get to my actual configuration, we'll see how this works properly. So, the more interesting thing you can do with this sort of thing, well, actually, before we move on, we can say some more reasonable examples of propertize, and that will hopefully actually. Oh, right. Sorry. I think it's because I forgot that I have this in an extra layer of quotes. So let's say, right, so the reason this I think isn't going to work here, so if we just say like oops, this hover, so now we see, hopefully you can see on my screen here, I don't know if it's showing up in the video, but in the little hover thing is now saying hello. I think it's being clipped off screen and it's recording. I think you can kind of see at the bottom there saying hello. So what I wanted to do though is call a function. So it can do something dynamic called the buffer name. So with this, it's not going to work because it's a static thing. If I tried to say, I want the help echo to be buffer file name, and run this, now when I hover, oops, it's not doing anything because it's treating this as a list because this whole thing is quoted. So how can we make this do something dynamic? So what we can do is instead of propertize, we can use the eval property. And in this case, it's actually going to run code. So we give it a list of things to do. And now in here, we can call just a normal propertize function. So the string we're going to propertize is still this format string. But now we can say the help echo is going to call the buffer file name function. So now if we eval this, so right now it's not associated with a file in this buffer, so it's not going to show anything. But if we open up a file, let's just go to some random file, create a file here. So this is loading the default Modeline format, because by default this setting this variable is like window local. So if I wanted to apply everywhere, I'd use setq-default. What I'm going to do is just copy it and then hit meta colon and then just paste it there to evaluate it in place. So now we have the Modeline again. Now if I hover over, again I think it might be because I have this set up to show things in a little pop-up, but it's now showing the file name of that buffer in the hover. So now this is actually dynamically evaluating code when we click on, or every time the Modeline displays, it will evaluate this file name based on that. So we can do some other sort of fun things with this. So something I don't like that display that the default format uses to show the modified state. I find it somewhat arcane the way it looks, where it's like % signs and stars and pluses or whatever. I find it kind of hard to read. What I prefer to do is use some special characters from the font that I'm using, which is called Pragmata Pro. I like it a lot. So what I do here, again in this eval, I can say when buffer modified p, then I can display a string. So I just have this in another window. I can just copy paste in here because it's a special character that this font has, not like a normal character. So, oops. If I then evaluate this, we see I have this little pencil character showing up when it's modified. And if I want it to look a little different, I can call propertize on it. In this case, I've already defined some faces that I can use. So I can just use this variable. And we can have a look at my full config to see how this is all set up, because things get a little more complicated. So you can see now it's nice and blue. You can do a similar thing to say when buffer read only, and that's actually a variable, not a function. So I just say when buffer read only. Then we can do a similar thing and say propertize, and then I'm going to again grab a special character from my other file. So I'm going to show the little lock icon, and again I can propertize that with a face and say I want to use my face that I have defined elsewhere. And so now we set this again, so it's not showing up now. If I toggle read-only mode with that Control-Q, now we see I have this little red lock icon displayed. So that's kind of the basics of setting up a custom mode line using this eval stuff to dynamically evaluate code. There's some other interesting things this will do. Like you can give it, instead of eval, if you give it a list of symbols, it will just pick the first one that's non-nil. So you can use this to pick something if something is defined. That's what this is doing here. We're saying if VC mode is true, then show the VC mode string, which will be like the get status or whatever. But now let's have a look at my actual config. So we'll see I do a couple things that are a little more complicated. So here's where I set this format. So for the most part, it's relatively normal. You can see, well, we'll talk about kind of what makes this interesting. Because I use Eval mode, I have this thing where it sets, picks if I'm in Emacs state, it shows this little GNU head. Otherwise, it shows the Vim icon. So you can see if I use Control-Z to toggle between Emacs and Vim, down in the bottom corner, you can see I have the blue GNU head. Press it, changes back to the VI or the Vim logo. And now something else I'm doing kind of interesting here is it's not a constant face. I'm using this function to pick the face depending on what state I'm in. So if I'm in normal mode, it's yellow. If I go to insert mode, it turns green. If I'm in operator pending mode, it turns purple. If I'm in visual mode, it turns gray. So you can do some kind of interesting things with the fact that we can evaluate code arbitrarily in the mode line to do stuff like picking faces dynamically. So I have some other stuff here. So this is just using the built-in mode line misc info, a bunch of modes put stuff in here. When I was using eyebrows before I switched to Emacs 28 to have actual tabs, they would show up in here. I have some customization here to make the eyebrows mode line look different, which is up above. I'll talk about that perhaps later. You can have a look at my config to see how it works. Also, like org clocks will show up in here, so I do use this built-in one. Here so this is a little hacky. If VC mode is true, then I propertize the string, and I just take a substring because if it's in a Git file, VC mode is Git. It's like the version control system and then the branch, and I just want the branch. So I kind of do this hacky thing where I just assume it's always Git, and I just chomp off the first 4 characters with the space, and then GIT, and then colon or dash. So kind of hacky, but just doing that for now. Something I can make more robust later. Here's this stuff we saw before in the basics, where I'm setting the face, setting the help echo, and here I'm doing something a little bit fancier, where I'm setting the dynamically picking the face depending on the value of this function, this selected window active P function. I'll talk about what that does in a second. Here's where I throw in the nancat scroll bar, just because it's fun. I like to do a fun thing. Setting, so I do the %p, or just sort of the percentage into the file. Here's again taking advantage of this thing where, so the way this works here is if this PDF missize indication liner mode is T, if that mode is on, then it will evaluate this code, which does some fancy stuff for the PDF tools, can detect when the actual page count of the PDF doesn't match the logical page count, will display them differently, whatever. This just only does that if that liner mode's turned on. Does this stuff to just add spaces to align it to the right. So you can see here, we just propertize this empty string, and then the display property we give it, we use this special construct, which again, you look at the documentation for propertize to see how this works. Say, give it spaces, and then align it to, and then we can do this to calculate how far to move it over. And it's doing some stuff, again, a little fancy here, where this part is a constant, like right friend, right margin. These aren't like real variables. These are there's like special arguments to the align to, but then this part is actually evaluated and put in there, so a bit fancy. Then at the end, we just propertize the major mode using this %m. So that's how I have this kind of basically Modeline here. I'm using another package called Cyfigure or something like that to make the Modeline, the major names, or the major mode show up differently. So instead of Emacs Lisp, it replaces Emacs with that little GNU head, just for fun. So the other final thing I want to talk about here, something to do a little fancy, is make it detect whether the window is active. So you note here if I have two windows, we can see in this other one, the icon is grayed out for that Vim indication. So you can see it's grayed out here, whereas the one where my point's in is yellow. And if it's modified, we can see it uses a different color. So in this active window, it says light blue, and in the inactive window, it says darker purple. So the way I do that is by two ways. So first, I have different faces set up depending on this variable. So that's why we have this if, where it's checking if selected window active P returns true. I have these two different faces defined, one for the active window, one for the inactive. And then this Eval line state face function does a similar thing, where it checks is the window active and then picks from the faces differently. So the way this works is somewhat hacky. I believe I took this approach from Spaceline, where I have a variable that keeps track of the selected window, and then have some functions to set the selected window and then unset the selected window based on things. So this just the set selected window expects to be called, where it just checks what the selected window is, then sets this variable to that window, and then forces a Modeline update. Unset just sets it to be null and then updates. This is needed so if I just lose focus on Emacs itself, I just move the mouse out. See, now both windows are inactive. I move it back in, this becomes active. And then it's a matter of, I add some hooks to configuration change, focus in, focus out, to set and unset the window. And then I advise the handle switch frame and select window function. So after they run, it calls that set function again. And then I just have this simple function that just checks, is that variable stored to say the active window, does that match the current selected window? So using this, we can easily have this fancy Modeline that looks different as you move focus around without having to pull in some whole complicated third-party package. So that's kind of the basics, the introduction to how this kind of somewhat minimal, I guess, custom Modeline works. The rest of how it works is just a matter of defining faces. So I have a bunch of faces defined up at the top for the different modes. This used to be a little more complicated because I would make these icons look a little different, where they'd still have color in the inactive window, but simplified a bit now. So hopefully you found this somewhat interesting. Maybe this will inspire you to tweak your Emacs config a bit, maybe remove some dependencies if you have some big external packages you're using to make your stuff look fancy. This can inspire you to, hey, you can do it yourself. And I'll link my previous blog post on how to do this if you want to see kind of what this looked like previously, and also put a link to my config if you want to look over that in more detail. So I hope you all found this useful. Have a great day.